So welcome everyone that has joined us for the CPD webinar on the deeper implications of Budget 2023 for small businesses. We are practitioners in the room, mainly supporting small businesses. So if we know what the budget says, we can support our businesses better. And I'm happy to welcome Mwendabai Kalaluka into the room. Mwendabai and me have done many webinars before, so I know there's going to be lots of information. So I hope you've got your pen and paper ready, everyone, because just reviewing the recording later on is not going to be enough. And then there's some news that we want to share towards the end of the webinar too. There's some events coming up. The EPI specifically is involved in a project that I want to just briefly tell you about and opportunities for you in that regard. But yeah, IBASA chair at the moment, Mwendabai, you know, when I got to know you, you were the director of IBASA, so a long-standing person contributing towards the ecosystem for small business growth. Managing partner of IABC group, and they're working in the business rescue, the tax advising, and everything that has got to do with supporting businesses so that they can focus on the work that they do and make sure that the rest is in place for them. And looking forward to what you would be sharing with us today. So welcome to the room here. This is a good platform to share information, but also a platform for people attending to the event to engage. So please use the text chat just to comment. If you have a question, I see there's already a question in the Q&A, so we'll keep our eye open on the Q&A. Thanks, William. You already know your question. You come prepared for this webinar. But Mwendabai, I'll hand over to you to talk to us about the implications of the budget. It's been like a month ago already that it was delivered, so a lot of time to reflect and comment on that. And really looking forward to learn from you today what you have to share with us. I know you can do your own screen share, so maybe if you can get that going, then that would be good. But welcome.
Thank you so much, Christoph. I really appreciate that. I think my screen share is still disabled. Maybe you can just authorize me to share there.
I've now stopped my screen, so it should be available to you. Okay, you can try again.
Okay. Oh, there we go. All right. Thank you so much for the introduction. And a very good morning to all our listeners, wherever you are joining us from. We are indeed pleased to share with you the information that we've prepared for you today. Normally, when I discuss issues of budget and issues of taxes, I normally actually enjoy them being interactive, more in a workshop environment. But obviously, this is a webinar platform. So I think we might have some limitations in terms of how we interact, but I would encourage everyone to make sure that if you've got those questions, you note them down in the Q&A. And I'm sure Christoph will be kind enough, maybe if time does allow, to engage, to enable us to engage in some conversation if necessary. So I normally say when it comes to taxes, this is one of those areas in life where there's no exclusion. We can all comfortably say we are impacted by what happens within the tax space. The other thing I just want to mention is when I was preparing the presentation, because we do a lot of technical updates for accounting bodies and for tax bodies, tax professionals, where we go into technical, where we quote sections of the Act and so forth. I didn't want that approach for this specific webinar. I wanted the discussion in this particular webinar to be more focused on businesses, the business value of whatever information that we're going to share. And therefore, what we're going to talk more will be more in terms of incentives, as well as how you can, as businesses, you can access these particular incentives. All right, and because I know that there may be people who would be interested in more detailed information, especially from a technical perspective, obviously, which will not have time for enough time for on this particular platform. I'd requested, Christoph, I don't know if it's still possible or if it has been done already, that the 2 documents be shared with the audience, that they can be able to download this information so that they can engage even post the event. So again, just to reiterate, there's so much information we're going to go through today. We'll not be able to go through each part of it in detail. But what we'll try to do is we'll try to cover the most significant and the most important aspects. And then the rest of the information, I'm sure you can always engage with the documents which will be made available through to you. All right, so I think as we are saying, the budget speech was delivered a while ago, but it's not stale. I think a lot of provisions which came out of this budget, some of them are not even implemented yet. You're going to see as we go through the presentation that there are still things that we are still awaiting, but they were spoken about during the presentation that Minister Godongwana made in Parliament. However, the details and provisions of some of those elements are not yet published and released by Treasury. So there's still going to be more information that is going to come out in respect to the 2023-2024 budget. All right, so normally a lot of people ask a question to say, is this a good budget? And I want us to have that question in the back of our mind as we go through the presentation. I think some of us might have already have engaged with the budget presentation, with the contents that obviously came with that particular speech, the budget speech, which was made on the 22nd of Feb. I want us to think, honestly think, and have a personal view of whether that budget was a good budget for South Africa or not. But as we start, just so that we've got context, I want all of us to understand the environment in which this budget was drawn. And that for this particular reason, some of us actually do believe that I think this was the most significant budget ever presented in this country. And it might not be contained in the presentation, but there are some sentiments which become more of, where you applaud a person. So a lot of the tax practitioners, we gave a lot of applause to the Minister of Finance, all right? We almost became a fan of him. And not that he's done something that is spectacular, but because we all know that government obviously is made up of politics and politicians. But one commendable thing that happened in the budget speech was the fact that they were able to separate politics from reality. So there was so much political pressure. Remember, this budget speech is literally a pre-election budget speech. So in other words, there was enough pressure on the minister to deliver a budget that would be filled with electioneering, if you understand what I'm saying, for the ANC to garner votes, to garner support. But they didn't do that. They were very professional, very focused, very realistic in terms of how this budget was drawn. So that we gave a lot of applause to the minister. So on this slide, you can just see some of the challenges, and I'll just highlight some of them. For us to understand how difficult this budget was. This budget was made in a space or at a time when we've got so many struggles. I wouldn't even know where to start listing all the challenges that we are facing as a country. And it's not just South Africa that's facing challenges, by the way. I think as Christoph had introduced in the introduction, when he mentioned that some of these challenges are actually external, they are more international than local. However, nonetheless, we are all impacted on. So remember, we just came out of COVID. I think COVID, if there was something that hit every economy hard, was the COVID-19 pandemic. And it came at a time when, if you'd recall, our economy was really struggling already. We had the downgrades. And just this year, we received the bad news of the grey listing. Now, again, some of the information I'm going to give you here today, because so much information, I might not be able to go into it in detail. But should you require some of these details, please, on the slides towards the end, I've put contact details there where we can share information and maybe do a follow-up webinar as well. All right, so you talk about the COVID-19, talk about the global economic, I call it an economic meltdown because everyone's really struggling. Just a few weeks ago, for those who follow current affairs, you would have noticed that there are some banks which have gone under. And we can't explain the circumstances at this point under which those banks have actually collapsed. And we all know that when banks start collapsing, it's normally a signal. It's a very, very bad signal of things that could possibly come. And on top of that, look at, for instance, what just happened a year or two ago when the Russian-Ukraine conflict started. None of us ever anticipated that this conflict could last for over a year. And we all understand the ramifications of that particular conflict, not only in terms of your food inflation, but in terms of the cost of energy and so forth. And I don't like talking about this one because this is the one that pains me the most. Number 9 on your challenges there, your rolling blackouts. And somebody has already alluded to the load shedding. Some businesses have had to close because of load shedding. I think in the news, we heard a week ago or 2 weeks ago where we're told your restaurant retail outlets for KFC, some of them haven't been able to keep their doors open. And it's not just them. If you also follow Pick and Pay and the other retail giants like your ShopRite, they are saying they are burning millions, if not billions of rands in diesel to keep the operations on. So the rolling blackouts, it's almost like another pandemic after COVID. So imagine all these challenges. And then on top of that, capital, then unemployment, which among the youth, it's estimated to be almost 50%, which means almost half of our youth, as energetic as they are and as talented and as educated as they are out of employment. This is the kind of environment in which this budget was drawn, okay? And it is a challenge. And I think I said we all gave a lot of applause to the minister for this particular budget because we understand those challenges in which as a country we found ourselves in. And he had to then go ahead and generate this particular budget. And we all understand that when there are challenges, there's competition, okay, conflicting competition for resources. And as a minister, he has to balance those particular needs which are conflicting to ensure that everything is catered for as best as it possibly can. So, I mean, if we are to look at, for instance, what is the key focus of government? The key focus of government, and my apologies, I can't access the charts because I think there was a poll question that Christopher had put forward just at the start of the webinar to say, what would your priorities be? Well, on this slide, I've shared what some of the priorities of governments actually have been. And some of these priorities are not easy ones for the government because it's not even a question of whether they have a choice in it. So like say, for instance, we talk about basic education. Basic education is not only a requirement, it's actually a human right enshrined in the Constitution, which means if as citizens we feel that we are not getting that particular service, we can actually take the government to court because then that's a violation of our human rights. These are all the priorities that the minister had to juggle with in coming up with a budget, Okay, and I'm going to sort of like rush through some of this because I don't want to focus so much on the policy and the economics part of it. I want to get to the tax incentives, but I just thought I'd give you a bit of background so that we understand. Literally, as a country, you would agree that we are sitting in a sinking ship. Okay, look at the downgrades, look at the gray listing, look at the contracting economy. Our growth forecast has been downgraded as well. Look at all the challenges that we see on the ground. And some of these, you can also see them in the business ecosystem, especially among the SMEs. You can see the struggles, all right? This is the environment that we find ourselves as a country. And it's disheartening. And sometimes we meet business people, we meet clients, and you can see that people are concerned, and genuinely so. In some cases, it's so terrible because you can see that people are losing hope, all right? And this particular budget speech was of such great importance because it afforded the government, this budget speech afforded the government an avenue to respond to those challenges. So when I look at the finance minister's budget speech, for me, it's not just a budget. It's about what government plans on doing to address all the challenges that I've already highlighted in the early stages of the presentation, all right? So in terms of how they structured the priorities, okay, and again, I've indicated in terms of where those priorities are coming from. So some of them are not even a question of choice. It's a question of, it's a human right. So you would see there in terms of the allocation of the budget. So on the left-hand side, what I do have is where they're spending the money, or in terms of what they intend to spend the money on. Okay, and you can see that the huge chunk, unfortunately, within our country, the huge chunk of spending still goes towards social development as well as education. All right. And like I said, with education, I can assure you, in terms of how your constitution is written, especially when it comes to basic education, the government is compelled, the government is obliged to ensure that they prioritize that. But you can see quite clearly there, I think, in terms of the spend. So if you had to look at the table or the graph that is presented for you there, you can see that your biggest chunk obviously goes to your education, followed by social development, and then followed by healthcare. Now, sometimes we do have discussions around policy in terms of saying, is this level of prioritization sustainable within the context of South Africa as a country? Some have gone to the extent of comparing South Africa to the more developed countries like the US and some countries in Europe, where social services are almost available to citizens 100% at no cost. And unfortunately, I think as South Africa, we can't copy those particular models in their current state because obviously we're facing different challenges. So yes, I think if you were to look at that budget allocation in terms of the spend and prioritization of spend, those who argue that South Africa is being turned into a social welfare state, I think they might have a point, because literally that's where bulk of the budget goes. I think in the 2023-2024 budget, you can see social development there was allocated 378 billion. All right, that's just for social development. And then if we are to look at, where the money is supposed to come from, that's also another interesting sort of like outline. Let me actually use this slide here. I think we're going to make these documents available for download so that you can engage with them in greater detail. If you look at where the source of our money is coming from, and this is probably one of the reasons why we have such a huge outcry from those that are working, or the so-called working class. If you look at where our money is coming from, and very consistent, by the way. In other words, when I say consistent, what I'm actually talking about here is you can go back 10, 12 years budgets prior to this one. You're going to find a very similar kind of pattern in terms of prioritization as well as the source of finance. So when you look at where our income is coming from, it's mostly funded by individual taxpayers. So you can see there that your individual your personal taxes are actually funding 33%, which means out of the entire budget, which is currently sitting at about 2.24 trillion rands that the minister presented, 1/3 of that is going to come from the working class through personal taxes. And this is why whenever we do budget presentations and budget analysis, there's always questions around what is happening to the personal taxes, and I do cover that in the presentation. So your personal taxes as well as your VAT are the two most contributing sources to your government income that it generates. Okay, between the two of them, they're actually contributing 57%. That's almost close to 2/3. That is significant. All right, so for those of us who are working and paying taxes faithfully, you may give yourself a lot of applause as well. You can see how far you are helping to take this country forward. So again, like I said, this is the question that I want us to have at the back of our mind. Was this budget a good budget? Was it a budget that we deserved? And we're going to sort of like touch on that in our conclusion. Right. Getting into the detailed sections of the budget, and I'm going to try to go a little bit quicker. Like I said, I want to make sure that we've got enough time for interactions and questions towards the end. Because my focus was more on the incentives, I actually called this one a new development. I called this one a new development because this is something that is new, and I'll try to explain it to the best of my abilities. If I can't cover all the questions or the explanations adequately, we might even maybe make a follow-up webinar regarding this. So you might have noticed that one of the challenges is that of the energy crisis. And what the energy crisis has made us do, which is positive, it has made humanity to rethink energy and to start considering what they're now terming as renewable energy. And the government has taken that further. On the concept of renewable energy, they've actually built some incentives which are there to motivate not only individuals, but businesses as well, to pursue renewable energy. And I'm going to share a few of these in as much detail as possible. So renewable energy for me, it was government response to the crisis. And for me, this was positive. I would have been surprised if there was nothing like that. So what they've done is they have come up with two measures for renewable energy, okay? And they've covered both bases. So they've come up with provisions for business. They've also come up with provisions for individuals. So no one is left out in terms of your renewable energy incentives. One of the key incentives which they've come up with, and like I said in the presentation, maybe in the slides, it might not go into detail, but there are some documents which will be made available for you to download, which has got details on all these elements which we're going to discuss. For me, this was a big one for business, where they are giving what I like to term as an accelerated capital allowance. Now, I know that's tax language, and I'm trying to avoid going too much in the technicalities of the tax. But essentially what they're saying is to incentivize business to invest in renewable energy, where they spend money in renewable energy, they buy assets, they buy equipment that can help to generate renewable energy. They are going to give them a 125% deduction to reduce their taxable income by the 125%. Now, in the budget speech, as well as how the provision or the incentive has been written, they actually don't call it a capital allowance, but technically for us in tax, we know that this translates into a capital allowance. So what I think you'd all be aware that when a business, you purchase and invest in assets, you are then allowed to recoup or recover the cost of those assets over a given period, whether you are using a special tax allowance like Section 12, or you are using what we call the wear and tear under Section 11E under the Income Tax Act. So essentially what they're saying is if you spend money and you buy assets that help to generate renewable energy, you will be given a deduction, not 100%, not the value of what you've spent, but 125%. So you actually recover more than you spend. And this for me is significant. And it shows government's intent in incentivizing and motivating businesses to look for renewable energy sources and invest in those particular sources. All right. Like I said, I think if at the end of the presentation, more details are required, please, we will be able to engage further post the presentation. Like I said, we might not be able to get into great amount of detail in some of these things. Okay, so for businesses, that was one. And by the way, just allow me to go back here. When we're doing the budget analysis, one thing that I've noticed was that there tends to be confusion when in terms of the Act and in terms of the pronouncements of Treasury, when they talk about business, we tend to want to associate business with companies, okay? I just want to clarify that upfront, that when we say this is a special capital allowance for businesses, we are not saying businesses as in juristic entities or legal entities. We are saying this is what you are able to access if you are running a business. It doesn't really matter if you are running a business as a company or you are running a business as an individual, which means even on an individual tax return, you can still be able to access this particular capital allowance. The requirement is that it must be linked to a trade. So when you demonstrate to SARS in terms of your eligibility to claim that 125%, SARS wants to see you being able to demonstrate a trade. So how you trade, whether you are trading as a sole proprietor or a partnership, which is in your individual capacities, or you are trading it through a close corporation or a PTY, it actually doesn't matter. So when we talk about business in this context, we are talking about carrying out trade, okay? The other incentive that the Treasury has spoken about in terms of motivating businesses is they've even gone as far as indicating. Now, remember I was saying that this is the part of the sort of like the information which Treasury hasn't yet come clearly upfront in terms of what would be the key requirements. So like I was saying that we are still waiting for further guidelines. We are still waiting for further guiding documents in terms of how some of these incentives will work. But the minister did indicate, and it's part of the budget speech, that there will be some kind of loan guarantees which are availed to SMEs to enable them to finance procurement of equipment, assets that contributes towards renewable energy. And for me, again, this is significant, all right? So essentially what the government says is you can't even claim cash flow. Government is going to say, look, you go to the bank, you go to FNB, you go to IBASA, we are going to guarantee the loans, get the funding, go and buy and invest into renewable energy, okay? So in terms of the details of how these guarantees or guarantee loans work, that hasn't yet been sort of like populated and published by Treasury. We are still waiting on that. But just so that you know, it is there, okay? It is in the pipeline and it is coming. Then still on the topic of renewable energy, they then distinguish to say, look, we are also going to incentivize individuals. We are not leaving individuals out. And now when we talk about individuals, I mean, if you follow my definition of business area where I said business actually refers to carrying on a trade. So whether you are a person or a juristic entity, that doesn't really matter. When it comes to individuals, the key definition here is that when we're talking about individuals, we are talking about private residences, all right? So just know that this special provision here, and I think here, in fact, it would be incorrect the way I've headed it to call it a capital allowance. In terms of individuals, it's not really an allowance. In tax terms, in technical tax terms, the way they've structured the incentive for individuals is it's actually a rebate, okay? So I think instead of calling it an allowance, let's rather call it a rebate. That would be more technically correct from a tax perspective. And what they are saying is, you will be able to claim a rebate, all right, of up to 25%, but it is capped. So they are saying you're going to claim a rebate of up to 25% of your total spending on solar panels. I think if you checked in some publications and some discussion forums, they call this the rooftop panel or solar panel allowance or rebate. That's actually what they call it. It's called a rooftop solar rebate or solar panel rebate. And the way they've structured this one here is, it is very specific that it only applies to solar panels. So for some of you that might have already gone ahead and invested into alternative energy or solar energy, you know that there are, I think, 4 main elements in terms of the cost of that kind of a project. One is you do have the rooftop solar panels, okay, which is one component. The other important component in that particular setup is your inverters. And then the third component is your batteries, because you need to have batteries to be able to store the energy which is captured from through the solar panels. And then the fourth component is the installation cost itself, because you need to have qualified people, qualified electricians, and I'm going to explain further on that, for them to come and install. So there are 4 components of a project of that nature. What Treasury is saying is that they are only giving you a rebate on the solar panels only. And they are limiting it to 25% of the cost. And they are capping it at 15,000, which means you're going to get that, you're only going to get 15,000. And here's a further interesting point on the solar panel rebate, on the rooftop solar panel rebate, is that in terms of the period that Treasury has allocated, this is only running from the 1st of March 2023 to the 28th of February 2024. So it's only running in the 2024 tax year, 2023-2024 tax year. What it means is that this particular rebate is so unique that it's only available for 1 tax year, which means as a taxpayer, you can only claim it once, and you can only claim it up to the value of 15,000 rands. That is it. And for you to qualify for that particular rebate, I think I do have information that's stipulated there. There we go. I think I did put a bit of information there. So for you to be able to qualify, you must be able to demonstrate that your solar panel installations were brought into use after the 1st of March 2023. So unfortunately, it's tough luck for those who were very innovative and forward-thinking, and they installed their solar panels way back in 2022 or 2021. So sometimes I think maybe then being forward-thinking doesn't help, like in this particular instance. So if you already installed your system, you cannot claim the rebate, because the specific requirement is that the installation must have happened after the 1st of March 2023 and before the 28th of February 2024. So just within that 12 months period. All right. And SARS is going to critically check on this particular requirement. So one of the requirements you're going to see, I think it's also covered under the documents, is that when you install your system, you must have what they call a COC. I think they call it an electrical installation certificate, whatever it is. But you must have a certificate of compliance of that particular installation. It's more like you getting a fire certificate for any electrical installation. It's very similar in this particular case. So the installation certificate that you get, signed by somebody who's qualified in terms of the Electrical Installation Regulations 2009, it will indicate the date on which they commissioned that particular installation. And that will be the date that SARS will use to determine if your installation fell in the stipulated period for the purpose of meeting the requirements. Okay, just quickly running through the other requirements, please take note before you run and purchase your solar panels, that this rebate for individuals, it only applies to new and unused PV panels. So you can't get second-hand ones. It has to be new and unused. How SARS know? They'll request for a tax invoice for when you procured your PV panels, okay? And it's only PV panels that will qualify. However, in addition to that, there's a capacity threshold where they say these PV panels must be able to generate a minimum of 275 watts per panel for them to qualify. So you really need to get the right spec when you are setting up your system. All right. The other important information there, like I said, it has to be inspected and it has to be certified as safe. And I think they only did this to make sure that these installations are actually safe. Okay. It's not just for purposes of SARS, but it's also for purposes of the safety of you as a taxpayer, you as the installer, you as the homeowner, to make sure that from this installation, you won't have an incidence of fire or anything of that particular sort. All right. The other critical requirement, which we need to take note of, is that when the installation has been done, they actually want this particular installation to feed into the mains of your residence. So remember I said this only applies to private residences because this is for individuals. So it's where you live, it's where you reside. And they say that the solar system, once you've put in the system, it must go through the DB box. Now, I don't want to get into the details of the electrical and stuff like that. I'm sure those of you who are in that space, you understand what I'm talking about. But yes, and then I did speak about the 1st of March 2023 to the 29th of February 2024. So those are the requirements if you are keen in accessing that particular incentive. And you see, I spent a lot of time on this one because for me, this is quite new. We've never had this before, by the way. It is a very good response that the government has come up with, responding to the energy crisis that we are currently having. Okay, there are two main documents which you need to be able to produce when you do your claim for the rebate. Remember, this is not a capital allowance. So in other words, the rooftop solar panel rebate does not reduce your taxable income. Your taxable income will still be whatever it was. But I mean, if you know and you've dealt with tax calculations, you know that a rebate actually is used to reduce your tax payable. So after you've done your tax calculations and you've worked out how much tax is payable, you're then going to come and minus this particular rebate. So just like any other rebate, like your individual rebates, the one below the age of 65, 65 to 75 and so forth, I think we all know that a rebate cannot give rise to a refund. So which means for you to even use that 15,000, you must have tax payable. So in other words, if your tax payable was 5,000 and then you claim a 15,000 rebate, you only be able to use the 5,000 and you're going to forfeit the other 10. So in other words, because of this rebate, you cannot end up in a tax refundable position. It can only help to reduce your tax liability as it has been determined. I hope that point is clear. I think on that note, let's leave that one and I'll quickly pass through the other ones just so that we can sort of like make it to the end of the presentation. So I think you saw when I was discussing the source of our finance, the source of our taxes, and we said number 1 and number 2 contributors, it is personal tax and it is VAT. All right, personal tax plays a critical role in sustaining our economy and our functioning of government in South Africa. Like I said, one third of the total income that we generate comes from personal taxes. And for that reason, and I also know that we pay quite a lot of taxes. In fact, there was a meme, you know, like a joke where somebody says, there was this joke about a picture of a guy smiling and the guy was very disappointed. I think some of you might have seen that flying around social media. So they did something around the payslip where they say, when you look at your gross pay, you are so excited. You look at this gross pay and you'll be smiling like, oh, wow. But when you look at the net pay, you'll be like, wait a minute, what happened there? And it's exactly because of personal taxes. So the personal taxes hits us as individuals the most because it actually hits our pocket. What we take into the bank or what we take home is affected by the personal taxes. So there's always a key interest in terms of what's happening there. You'll be pleased to know that the minister was not oblivious to the fact that I think as personal taxpayers, we were already crying out. So he was very much aware. And they did spare us quite a bit, I think, in terms of the personal taxes. So what you find is in the 2023-2024 budget, they actually didn't make significant changes. So no taxes were increased in any of the brackets. The brackets stayed fairly the same as they've been before. What they did was to make adjustments to the brackets bands. So you know your brackets have got a starting band and a closing band. So what they did was they increased those by rate of inflation. Okay, we call it an inflation adjustment. So the impact of the inflation adjustment is it reduces your taxes slightly just to compensate you for the inflation that is obviously always increasing. That's what your inflation adjustment essentially does. It just helps to reduce your taxes slightly. In that vein, also, you'll notice that your rebate for individuals was also increased slightly. Again, inflation adjustment. But the increase in your personal rebate, now here we're talking about the personal tax rebate. What it meant was that the threshold for people that pay tax also went up. So you can see, I think it used to be 91,250 in the 2022-2023 tax year. It has gone up to 95,750 in the 2023-2024 tax year. So what that means is that for you to actually have to pay tax, you have to earn in a year more than 95,750. That's what that means, right? Your medical aid tax credits also received some basic inflationary increase. I think it was 347 for the first for the main member and first beneficiary last year. Now the main member and first beneficiary are going to get 364. So it's a couple of runs, not much, but just like I said, I think it's very consistent with the policy. The other key changes there in terms of your personal taxes was the lump sum payments, where the lump sum payments, the exempt portion was increased by 10% from 500,000 to 550. What that simply means, and I know it might not be much, and that was the kind of feedback we are getting wherever we're presenting these budget updates, is to say, well, that's 50,000 difference. So it might not sound as a lot, but I think for those who actually get this lump sum, whether it's retirement or anything like that, essentially what they're telling you is that, look, you can withdraw up to 550,000 and it won't be subjected to tax. You only pay tax on the amounts over the 550. All right, so that is on the personal taxes. And again, I'm just hoping that we are noting whatever questions we do have and maybe recording them somewhere. If time permits, at the end of the presentation, we will come back and we'll try to address those particular questions. Then you've got poor us, the motorists and commuters. Unfortunately, I always say that for some funny reason in life, you are either one of them. You cannot say you are exempted from this particular section. If you don't drive, I can guarantee you commute. So either way, the fuel levy still hits you, or the cost of fuel. So what you find there on the fuel levy is that, to be honest, I personally didn't expect the minister to change anything there, because that is one element that has been quite problematic for the past few years. Okay, what do I mean? If you look at what happened, especially from last year or the year before, when the Russia-Ukraine conflict started, what then happened was that we had all these sort of like limitations in supply of crude stock. And we know what that does in terms of your rules of supply and demand. So once supply was restricted, your cost of crude actually started going up. And all the countries, not just us here in South Africa, all the countries started experiencing a rising cost in terms of fuel. In fact, if I recall, at one point, especially before COVID, I think our petrol price was somewhere just around maybe 11, 12 rand or 13 rands per liter. I'm not too sure. My memory is not that good, but I think we're somewhere around 11 to 13 rands per liter for fuel. And then you fast track, all right? You fast track 3 years on. We are now sitting at 22 rands to 23 rands per liter. That is substantial increase, which means in the past few years, 3-4 years, I don't even know what percentage increase that is. And I wonder how, as motorists and commuters, we've survived. So the government was aware that this is problematic. If you remember, when at the height of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, they even came up with some suspensions in the fuel levy, where they were suspending certain portions and then they said it to be phased out. And the reason why the government was compelled to do that, even if they needed the revenue, was because the fuel price would have gone way too high. And we know what happens when the fuel price goes high. It fuels food inflation, and before you know it, your entire inflation index goes up. So they had to mitigate that. So when the minister presented this budget, we didn't really expect any changes there. And we didn't get any surprises. So there were no changes. And I think that was a very good move in terms of your fuel levy. All right, and then we come to the sin taxes. This category of taxes are quite interesting in that, and I think that's why the government can afford to be so reckless with them, because what Treasury simply says is to say, look, these sin taxes as a taxpayer, you actually do have a choice of whether you want to pay them or not. And I think I would like your comments maybe in the chat. We'll check on the chats a little bit later on, just to hear about whether you actually agree with that sentiment, that your sin taxes are taxes that we incur or we pay as individuals and as businesses out of a matter of choice. So these are your taxes on your narcotics. These are your taxes on your sugars. These are your taxes on the spirits and so forth. It's mostly entertainment related stuff. So the government has been very reckless with these ones. And I think for a good reason, that they say the objective is to sort of like direct and change behavior. All right. In the 2023-2024, obviously, the increases were there for sin taxes. There's never been a year when there's no increase in sin taxes. Those are the guys who are guaranteed that they always get escalations in terms of those taxes. All right, but I'm not going to go into much detail around that. However, what I want us to think about, and maybe it is something that we need to consider for the future around sin taxes, is to say, government will always state, okay? They'll state very clearly to say they don't impose sin taxes to collect revenue. So the objective of sin taxes is not to generate revenue, but rather to discourage certain forms of behavior, okay, and to promote healthful living. So the question I want to pose to the audience today is, how effective are these sin taxes in achieving that specific objective of altering people's behavior? Because that's what the government says these are the main objectives of this particular tax. So according to the research that was done, and like I said, I think we'll sort of like gather the responses on the chat towards the end. But according to a research that was done, what they've actually found, and this is not peculiar to South Africa, this is the world all over, that it doesn't matter how you escalate these sin taxes. The demand never goes down, the behavior never changes. So in the long run, it has just become an extra source of income for the government. All right. So, but it will be interesting. I think let's think about that in terms of how effective are these sin taxes in altering people's behavior. All right. And then I'm going to then sort of like go towards a close by highlighting the taxes which did not change. And you're actually going to notice as I'm coming to the end of my presentation just now, so that we can have a Q&A session, is that there were very few changes in this budget. And I think I'll try to highlight in terms of what I think in my opinion, what the reason for the government holding on to this would be. But a lot of taxes remain the same, okay? Your dividend tax didn't change. I think it was increased from 15% to 20% a couple of years back, and it hasn't moved ever since. And again, around, I think on the chat, we can start to maybe discuss and debate as to why this is not considered for escalation. My personal view is that our current president and just the general policy of the ANC, I think their view of the economy is that the economy is going to thrive and grow if we attract foreign investment, okay? So they are very focused on attracting foreign investment. Now, if that is their goal, to attract foreign investments, then it would make sense why they don't want to touch the dividend tax, because your dividend tax hits the pockets of the investors. So in my personal view, they don't want to agitate the investors because they are pursuing this path of attracting foreign investors to come from offshore and come and invest money into our business, into our country, sorry. Okay, so that did not change. The VAT also remained the same. Okay, what is the reason for that? I think if you do remember, was it 2 or 3 years ago when the VAT was changed from 14 to 15%, and we almost had riots in the country. So I'm sure they are very cautious of that particular fact. And also bearing in mind that, as it has always been argued, that VAT affects mostly predominantly the poor. So they then wouldn't want to touch that because it makes the prices of commodity to escalate. So VAT did not change. It stayed the same. So was the withholding taxes and the security transfer taxes as well. So you'd actually see that the majority of the taxes in everything that we've discussed, there were no significant changes, including your personal taxes, other than the incentives which were then brought in to sort of like address the energy crisis. All right, and then in conclusion, if you just bear with me there, let me just see if I can get power for this laptop.
Well, so while Mwendabai is looking for power for the laptop, maybe what we can do is change.
There we go.
Oh, you sorted?
Yes, no, it's sorted. I was just plugging it in.
Okay.
Because I changed the laptop for the presentation. Yes. So I think then coming to the conclusion, when everything is said and done, and literally this is the conclusion of the presentation, I think we can discuss in terms of what this information does for us and what it says to us. In my view, if we were to go back to the question that I posed earlier when we started, to say, was this a good budget or not? I firmly believe that that would depend on who's asking that particular question. Because the nature of a budget is that you are trying to provide resources that is going to solve solutions for many stakeholders, usually with conflicting needs. And I think each stakeholder will always want something extra for themselves compared to the other one. So for the minister, then it was a very delicate balancing act in terms of what he was able to put up in the budget. And like I said, I think all of us will probably feel that we might have been shortchanged. We might have been shortchanged somewhere, but I firmly believe that I think everyone got something out of this particular budget. So we gave a lot of applause to the minister because he really did the best to make sure that every stakeholder's interests were taken care of and represented. But maybe I think as we go into the Q&A sessions, we can have more debates and discussions around that. All right. For me, point number 3 is a very personal one in that normally when we present this and when we talk about the economy and we talk about South Africa as a country, we all look like, it always feels like we are talking about a country that is on a downward path in so many aspects. Talk about security, talk about almost every aspect of our lives. I think we feel that things are not going very well, okay? And maybe that is true to a particular extent, but I want to challenge the audience that came here today for this particular budget presentation, because I want to believe that we are professionals, we are leaders, not only in business, but within our communities. I want to pose a challenge that amidst all these challenges and amidst this sort of like a bleak message which is popping up in this particular presentation, that in actual fact, I think we hold the key to the solutions that this country needs. All right. In most cases, and you see it on social media, on the Twitter platforms, on the Facebook platforms, we are always very quick in terms of bashing and criticizing the government, which we should. I think it's our right to do that. But I can assure you that if we are all going to wait for people in political office to resolve all the problems that we've got, then we're going to be waiting for a very long time. So I want to put it out there to all the professionals in the room. I know we must be having different types of professionals within within our audience, that we must take lead and find solutions that is going to get us out of this mess in which we are. So that is the challenge that I want to pose for everyone, even as we close this particular presentation, that let us be solution generators, not just people that complain. I think by now we all know what the issues around the country are. We all know what the issues around the economy are. What are we going to do about it as professionals? And I want to believe that, I mean, IBASA is a very important organization, a member-based organization with all the business advisors supporting entities that are part of government like your SEDAs, supporting entities like your GEPs, which entities ultimately support small businesses. And I'm of the view that that business ecosystem, especially the SME sector, actually is the one that holds potential to resolve some of the economic challenges that we've got. Just remember that if we have a thriving SME sector and a thriving business where entrepreneurs come on board and they create value, and professionals, accountants, tax practitioners, business advisors, they come and provide, coaches and mentors, they come and provide professional service, which ensures that our businesses are sustainable. We are going to be able to develop a sustainable economy where we create jobs, we reduce poverty, and ultimately that is going to lead to social and political stability within our country. So I just wanted to put that out there as I come to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much, Christoph. I think that's all that I had for the audience today. I think if time permits, we can do questions and answers. Thank you.
Yes, indeed. And that is a mouthful. Of course, when we talk about the whole tax system and everything that's involved, it is in the detail where the wonderful stuff and the scary stuff sometimes also lie. So thank you for finding that balance, and we will share a link just now to the content that Mwendabai has been referring to. So perhaps let's do that quickly before there are questions. I'm sure there are 2 or 3 only noted. So, but I think there may be more questions in the room. So let me do this quickly. So if we can go to the sharing of all the links and information that everyone wants, then we know that we've got that out of the way, and we can focus on the topic at hand. The SEDA and IBASA, you must also come in. I see Derek has shared the IBASA social media pages in the chat. So please click on those if you want to follow IBASA on social media and participate in a discussion that's happening there too, of course. But you may know that SEDA, IBASA and the EPI is presenting this event, the Biz Clinic ZA for business owners. It is a clinic event where business owners come with their questions, and then SEDA and IBASA business advisors attempt to provide them with good answers that will help them in growing their businesses. It's gained popularity. I think we've had 6 of them thus far, and every first Friday of the month. This event is for the entrepreneurs that are showing up into this space. So please join us there if you're an entrepreneur. Just go to bizclinic.co.za Then for practitioners, we've got our next month, our events being planned already. The topic is how to protect intellectual property in the small business context. And you can go to nextwebinar.the-epi.org to register for that. If you have your phone ready, you can just snap that QR code and it will take you to that site as well. So you can actually register today already for next month's webinar. I'll give you a list of all these links just now. I'm not sure if there's news from SEDA, but maybe we can come to that just now. The website is seda.org.za. And for IBASA, it is ibasa.org.za. If you want to engage with IBASA on email, you can go to send an email to info@ibasa.org.za. And then from the EPI side, maybe the most important here is the YouTube channel, where you'll find a recording of this event if you want to refer back, as well as past CPD events that are there. And then my last piece of announcement before I share all of these links with you is the DigiBiz program, which the EPI is a partner in with some others in the ecosystem. It's a new initiative to promote collaboration and finding of best practice solutions for us as practitioners, including with entrepreneurs and researchers in the field. You can find out much more about that by joining the workshop. That's tomorrow and next week, a selection of options for you. You can just go to workshop.digibiz.net.za, and that will take you through to a registration page for that. So this is kind of just a brief kind of bulletin board of things happening. I hope to see some of you there tomorrow too, because it's important for us to shape these kind of platforms that are being created. I will put these links again in the text chat of all these things that I've shared now, including the downloads one, which I didn't mention up to now, the downloads one. Downloads is bit.ly/budget downloads, and it will take you to a folder where those files will be for you to download, including the presentation that Mwendabai said he will share, as well as some other information relating to the budget. So those are kind of the announcements out of the way, except SEDA, IBASA, Derek, Mercy, Bonnie. Are there any other announcements to be made before we step off this and move on to questions?
No, there's nothing from SEDA.
There is nothing from IBASA except to say thank you to the chair for making time and a great presentation. And we are hoping that we can have you in the future again. And thanks to everybody for really listening and being part. And I believe that if there are any questions, you can still use our platforms to post those questions. We'll pass them to the chair so that you can be able to get the answers. Thank you.
Yeah, we still have a few minutes till 1 o'clock, so maybe we can spend that on addressing some of the questions that may have emerged. There was a hand. I think that hand has now disappeared since, so I think you did a great job, Mwendabai, because there was a question that someone got answered. William was referring to business continuity and incentives specifically for that. So you spoke quite a bit about the green, the energy stuff, the panels and so on, and installations and the rebates and the loans that are becoming available or will become available, of which some of the details are still to follow. But what about business continuity and incentives for that? Businesses that are under distress, there's nothing in the budget for that? That's a question from William.
Okay, thank you so much. So for businesses under distress, they didn't make any provisions for that. And I think it's something that has been in discussion now between the Department of Small Business as well as DTI, in that when Chapter 6 was launched and implemented, by that actually I mean the business rescue. It was supposed to be this friendly platform that helped struggling businesses to find their feet and nest themselves back into business operations. Okay, what we found over the years, your business rescue was only implemented in 2011, so it's still fairly new. It's only about 11, 12 years. But what we found out is that the cost of business rescue is very prohibitive, especially for small businesses. So even if the provision is there, your SMME kind of population of businesses can't actually access that particular service. So there was a suggestion that has been put forward a couple of years back, and I haven't made a follow-up in terms of how far they went with that. But they were supposed to come up with a funding model that would help to fund business rescue within the SME space so that they could actually access. So some SMEs know about business rescue, and some SMEs actually need business rescue, but whenever they look at the cost of the BR process, is just prohibitive, unfortunately.
Yeah, right. And there was also, I can't remember who now, Lynette, I think, was commenting about the retrospective, but yeah, you did speak about that. So when these incentives are now coming active and you've already done something, tough luck, you were too fast.
Maybe I can just quickly just confirm the start dates. So your rooftop solar panel incentives starts on the 1st of March, 2023, and it ends on the 29th of February, 2024. Your renewable energy for small businesses, that also comes in from the 1st of March, 2023. Then the guarantees, the loan guarantees to enable SMEs to be able to purchase the renewable energy solution or equipment. That's the one that they said it will come in effect from the 1st of April. So it's not yet in effect, but it should be coming in effect in the, I think in the next 1 or 2 weeks. And that's the one where we're also waiting for further guidelines in terms of how access to that funding assistance is going to work.
Right. So that's the other specific questions coming up, but you did put a challenge out to us as a community, Mwendabai, and maybe we can just, if someone wants to raise their hand, and did that resonate with you, the challenge that Mwendabai has put out to us to make our contribution in economic growth, not to say that we shouldn't raise our voices if there are things to highlight that are not right, but not to get out of the complaint mode and into the constructive mode of building things. Anyone that I saw there were a comment or two in the text chat around that, but you can raise your hand if you want to say something. We do have a minute or two. Otherwise, I'll remind everyone that, and I typed into the text chat now the link to a small feedback form, a quick one, that will allow us also to select topics that are appropriate for you in the future, and some feedback on how we do these events also helps in shaping how we do it in the future. So please, if you can click on that link, webinar feedback, I'll repeat, webinar-feedback.the-epi.org. I've put it in the text chat. That will be greatly appreciated. And then just also a reminder, above that, all the links there are, the downloads link included, the bit.ly budgets downloads link if you want the documents. Attend the co-creation workshop tomorrow and next week, workshop.digibus.net.za. It's all there in the text chat. And then all the other links are there too for you to see. And there's, I see, Concierge got a question for us, and maybe that will be the last thing that we will do here today, Mwendabai. How do we get the population that receive grants to be part of the ecosystem with the end in mind of them contributing to growth of the economy? So we are indeed, as you have noted. So that is, I suppose, the safety that we feel in the continuity of the policies being similar, the budget being similar to the past, as you've highlighted, sort of including the emphasis on making sure that the people at the base of the pyramid that are the poorest and perhaps the most marginalized from the economy are looked after in a little way, but now Conce is saying, how do we make sure that they actually become more active part in the economy and contribute towards the growth in a more thoughtful way?
Okay,
that's a big question. I'm not sure if we can answer it in 2 minutes. And but maybe we can do that as the exit to it's a bit of a bigger picture question, or point.
So I think just to attempt that maybe in a minute, it's a very important question. Like I said, South Africa cannot afford to be a welfare state like the US and the other countries where they've got to that. So the idea really is to get everyone into to actively be involved in the economy productively. And if you look at how people can participate in the economy, I mean, there are two basic ways in which they can participate in the economy. We can create jobs and absorb these people where they actually begin to work and earn an income. Then they will not be part of our welfare statistics, and they also not be part of our unemployment statistics, and they begin to earn money for the work that they do. Obviously, understanding that you're not always going to have jobs to absorb everyone, but the business or entrepreneurial opportunities are unlimited. I mean, if we look at some of the exciting programs which were put out like by the likes of SEDA, like in terms of the township economies and stuff like that, those kind of programs for me, they are critical, because what you're actually doing is you are empowering every person to be able to use their hands and actually do something for themselves and earn a living for themselves rather than depending on a grant. I think it will just be then the question of how effective these programs are being rolled out, and also sort of like your success rates of such programs. Probably maybe more of the performance management of the programs and anything else. But I think we have a lot of initiatives which are there to make sure that
these things all go hand in hand. One of the government will hold the policy in hand, but we do, as you reminded us, we are working with our operators, businesses, value creators, perhaps businesses that are close to doing something like that. Keep your eyes on the incentives, understand the incentives, because you can't advise your business, small business clients properly